Today I want to tell you a story about two Canadians. Let's call them Average Andy and Pension Pete. They're both 55. They earn the same salary, they save the same amount every year, and their financial lives are, in almost every way, identical. There's just one difference between them. Pension Pete has a workplace pension. Average Andy does not. Now, we'd all expect retirement to be easier for Pete, but the real question is, how much easier? How big a difference does a pension actually make? Let's find out. And stay to the end, because I want to talk about why these gold-plated pensions are quietly disappearing for most Canadians. Let's get into it. First, let's set the stage, because the backdrop here matters. A workplace pension, what's officially called a registered pension plan, is becoming a rarer and rarer thing. Today, only about 38% of Canadian workers are covered by one at all. But here's the part that really tells the story. There's a massive divide between the public sector and the private sector. If you work in the public sector, government, healthcare, education, you're very likely covered. Coverage there is around 87%. But in the private sector, only about 1 in 5 workers, roughly 20%, has a workplace pension. So if you've got a good pension, especially a guaranteed one, you're increasingly in a fortunate minority. Hold that thought, because it's the heart of this whole story. Now, the best kind of pension is what's called a defined benefit pension, the kind that promises you a set amount every month for the rest of your life, no matter what the markets do. That's the gold standard, and it's exactly what Pension Pete has. So let's give Pete a fairly modest one. Let's say his pension will pay him $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year, starting at 65. Not a king's ransom. The question is, will even that modest pension make a meaningful difference next to Average Andy, who has nothing but his own savings? Let's run the numbers. To keep this simple and consistent, I'll use round figures. Let's say both Andy and Pete need their retirement income to cover their living expenses, and that after their CPP and OAS, there's still a gap that has to be filled from their own money. This is the key idea. CPP and OAS form the base for both men equally. They both get those. The difference between them is entirely Pete's pension sitting on top of that base. Here's where it gets striking. Let's say after CPP and OAS, each man still needs to generate a certain amount from his own savings to live comfortably. For Average Andy, all of that gap has to come from his investment portfolio. Using the well-known 4% rule, the rough guideline that you can safely draw about 4% of your nest egg each year, Andy needs to have saved a substantial amount to produce that income. Let's say, for the sake of the example, his gap requires a portfolio of well over $1 million. Now look at Pension Pete. Because his pension is already paying him that $1,000 a month, the amount his portfolio has to cover shrinks dramatically. And here's the math that surprises people. That modest $12,000 a year pension, under the 4% rule, is the equivalent of having an extra $300,000 in savings. Think about that. To generate $12,000 a year yourself, safely, you'd need roughly $300,000 in invested capital. So Pete's modest little pension is doing the work of a $300,000 nest egg, money Andy now has to go out and save entirely on his own. Suddenly, that small pension doesn't look so small. So when we tally it all up, the difference is stark. Pension Pete is comfortably on track for the retirement he wants. Average Andy, to reach the same lifestyle, has to save tens of thousands of dollars more over his remaining working years, which may or may not even be realistic for him. And if Andy can't save that much extra, then he has a choice. Either work longer or accept a lower standard of living in retirement. In our example, Andy would need to trim his retirement spending by something like 12% to make the numbers work. That's not a catastrophe, it's manageable. But it's the difference between keeping the exact lifestyle you wanted and having to cut back. And that gap between Andy and Pete is created entirely by one modest pension. Now, I don't want to leave Andy feeling hopeless, because here's the reassuring part, and it's important. Both Andy and Pete can make retirement work. This isn't a story about one man thriving and the other in poverty. Andy simply has to be more deliberate, save harder now, be more careful with his budget later, and lean a little more on his own discipline. And remember, both men have the same solid foundation underneath them, CPP and OAS, guaranteed and indexed for life. So even without a pension, Andy is far from starting at zero. The pension isn't the difference between comfort and ruin. It's the difference between a comfortable retirement that takes less effort and one that takes more. But this brings me to the bigger, more important point, the one I really want you to take away. Why does Andy not have a pension in the first place? Because over the last few decades, the kind of guaranteed, defined benefit pension that Pete has been steadily disappearing from the private sector. The numbers tell the story plainly. Back in the early 1990s, the vast majority of pension members, around 89%, were in those guaranteed, defined benefit plans. Today, that's fallen to about 68%. And almost all of that decline has hit the private sector. Companies found these plans expensive and, crucially, risky for them, because the employer carried all the investment risk and the obligation to pay you for life. So, one by one, private employers shut down their defined benefit plans and replaced them with defined contribution plans, group RRSPs, RRSP matching, or, in many cases, nothing at all. And here's why that matters so much. Every one of those changes took the risk and the responsibility of funding retirement and quietly shifted it off the company's shoulders and onto yours. With a defined benefit pension, the company promised you a number and had to deliver it. With a defined contribution plan or a group RRSP, all you're promised is whatever you and your employer put in, plus or minus how the markets happen to perform. The guarantee is gone. The risk is now your problem. And most workers never fully understood the weight of what was being handed to them. That's really the lesson of Average Andy and Pension Pete. It's not that you've failed if you don't have a gold-plated pension. Most Canadians today don't, and the system has simply changed beneath us. It's that because fewer and fewer of us have that guaranteed pension cushion, your own retirement planning matters more now than it ever has for any previous generation. The pension that used to do the heavy lifting for your parents may simply not be there for you, which means the saving, the investing, and the planning that you do has to fill that gap. So if you're a Pension Pete, wonderful, you're fortunate. But still understand your options, because even good pensions have choices to make. And if you're an Average Andy, don't despair, but don't ignore it either. Save deliberately, lean on your CPP and OAS as the solid base they are, and treat your own planning as the thing that has to do the job the pension once did. Because in today's world, for most of us, we are the pension plan now. If you found this helpful, please give it a like and subscribe. There's plenty more plain English Canadian retirement content where this came from. I'll see you in the next one.